Good morning, all. Today we are going to talk about the alternative theories of firm, which is part of the sixth module. That is, it is actually the last part of the lectures which we are offering for the MA second semester. And in this particular lecture, what we are going to do is actually, other than the behavioral part, which we will discuss subsequently, first I would like to look into the aspect of the alternative theories of firm, because so far what we have done is actually the theories of firm in a what you call the certainty premise, as well as that is what is we have done in the first semester. We have seen the perfect competitive environment as well as the monopolistic environment in that context. But this here particularly what we are going to do is actually something called the alternative theory. Especially this is very important because this is also part of the larger shift in the firm's understanding, or understanding on the sorry the understanding of the firm, especially in the post 1950s. And there are so many alternative theories which is being developed during that period, is all summed up together in the alternative theories of firm, where it is actually moved away from the traditional understanding of a firm and its profit maximizing behavior. And now we are strictly not specifically speaking about profit maximization, but before that, actually, to that particular understanding of profit maximization, what made, in fact, to have this sort of a discussion in the foray? That was actually the kind of question, or why the original or the traditional neoclassical understanding or discussion of the firm as a unit of profit maximization is being questioned. This is actually the question which is we are going to discuss throughout this lecture. So marginalism was actually what we have seen earlier. That is, everything is basically the pricing of the commodity, the pricing of firm's production, etc., are based on the rules of the marginal, or largely known as the marginalist analysis, or the rules of the marginal cost, marginal revenue, etc. in that sense. So this is basically known as the marginalist understanding or marginalism per se. And this was being questioned by many economists, including this movement started by somehow by the questioning of Piero Straffa, which we had earlier in the previous semester. We had actually looked into some of the aspect of the monopoly and the market conditions questioning, spearheaded by Piero Straffa in that context. So the key focus of marginalism is how much extra use and gain from incremental increase in the quantity of good created, sold, etc., and how those measures related to the consumer's choice and demand. This was the concern primarily being addressed by the marginalist school of thought. And the marginalism covers such topic as a marginal utility, marginal gain, marginal rates of substitution, and opportunity cost within the context of consumer making rational choice in a market with known prices in that. So the idea of marginalism, hence, and its value in establishing market prices as well as supply and demand patterns was popularized by, we already know that Alfred Marshall's book Principles of Economics, which was published in 1890 onward. So marginalism is sometimes criticized as one of the fuzzier area of economics, as much of what is proposed is hard to accurately measure, such as an individual consumer's marginal utility, etc. So also marginalism relies on the assumption of near perfect market, which do not exist in the practical world. Still, the core idea of marginalism are generally accepted by most economic school of thought and are still used by business and consumers to make choice and substitute goods in a theoretical sense. But there are so many issues involved in that sense. So these were being severely or vehemently criticized by economists in 1930s, 40s, starting from Piero Straffa's treaty on all these aspects. So Neoclassical economics can be understood as a more general framework that includes marginalist concept and incorporate definitions of supply, demand, cost, equilibrium, scarcity, and economic efficiency. Whereas the neoclassical price theory does incorporate not only marginalist concept but also managerial or behavioral theories of the firm, which can be seen as an extension of the core body of the neoclassical framework. Neoclassical theory follows certain assumptions such as the entrepreneur is also the owner of the firm have a single goal of profit maximization. This could attain by applying marginalist principle MC is equal to MR, that the firm have perfect knowledge of the situation and known with certainty and its own demand and cost function. Then entry assumptions vary according to particular models. Entry is only to the actual intent, and that too happens only in the long run. And then taken in one period does not affect the behavior of the firm in another period, etc. All these were been the argument for marginalist theories, and based on these concepts, there are so many people who had vehemently supported this particular idea. And the first argument in favor of neoclassical theory of the firm is essentially methodological. That is, according to Friedman, the question to be asked by answering for the test of the theory, what is purpose of theory, and what are the criteria for good theory, etc., are a real question. And the answer is that the purpose of the theory is to make predictions which are testable and validated by the evidence. So this is actually the kind of understanding they had been spearheaded about marginalism and the neoclassical understanding. On the basis of these criteria, the realism of assumption of a theory is entirely irrelevant matter. Thus, a theory should be judged not on the basis of the realism of its assumption, but on the basis of the prediction it can make. Friedman argued that the neoclassical theory of the firm meets this criteria and is therefore perfectly acceptable in the academia in that sense. So theoretical understanding or whatever lecturing which we are making. So empirical evidence in favor of retaining the traditional theory of firm reveals that the modern firms supply marginalist rule in their accounting methods. Or for example, Barley's study of 110 excellently managed companies in the United States revealed that the firm follow marginal accounting and costing principle in their decision making. Now, this was actually all being supported, but later in 1939, there was a work which was being headed by Hall and Hitch criticized the traditional theory of firm for its assumption of profit maximization. But as pointed out by um, Robinson and Kahn, the element of profit maximization were found into the pricing decision of many of the firm investigated by Hall and Hitch in that sense. Further, Hall and Hitch themselves pointed out that their analysis that the price at the kink in the subjective demand curve is the profit maximization price over a wide range of marginal cost curve where it cuts the marginal revenue curves in its discontinuous position in that sense. So thus, the better critics of the marginal approach could not escape themselves from the profit maximization principle. This was the major criticism, in fact, Hull and Hitch talked about. But however, they have a the view that this idea of marginalism is still prevalent among them. So, not for profit. That is actually the kind of things which they were advancing. And for example, another set of an argument favoring the marginalist school is led by Professor MacLeb, and who defended the attack on the traditional theory of the firm in 1946. Pointed out that this criticism we will be seeing in a different context. But in 1946, he pointed out that, especially in the presidential address of annual meeting of the American Economic Association in December 1966, that despite the development of behavioral and managerial theories of the firm and the war of 1946 against the traditional theory of the firm, economists have not been able to force the abandonment of or subversion of marginalism. He observed, look at the textbook and you will find that marginalism has continued to dominate the teaching of microeconomics. Now, even if you look into today, still the same thing you can actually see across the globe, because doesn't mean that actually this is how everybody follows in the real world, but the point is everywhere it has been taught like this. So the alternative approach to the traditional theory of the firm are chiefly with regard to industries where firms are few and competition is ineffective. But the marginalist solution of the price determination under the condition of the heavy competition is not seriously contested by these approaches. MacLab therefore suggested that our attitude should be to stick with the assumption of a profit maximization because it is the simplest and is applicable to the largest or highest field, the largest field with which the less detailed information is in fact required. So it is not correct to say that modern firms have dispensed with marginalism and profit maximization goal. That is the toto in toto what all this kind of advancement on supporting the new classical economics being especially in the marginalist school been put forward, and rather profit maximization has been incorporated as one of the goal in the behavioral and managerial theories of the firm, as pointed out by Sitowski. And empirical studies of the businessman's behavior suggest the need for modifying or qualifying the assumptions of profit maximizations here in there, rather here and there, rather than the scrapping it all together. Okay, so these are actually the kind of support which had been received by marginalism in 1940s, especially after or in the 50s. This is also very crucial because during, as I said in the beginning, that the criticism leveled against marginalism by Pierre Straffa in late 1926 onwards is largely took up by many economists, and even the Great Depression and its solution kind of a macroeconomic principle being put forward by Keynes or people of similar kind. In fact, all talked about a kind of a heterogeneity in the philosophy of price determination. Basically, this is not the homogeneous kind of an understanding of a marginalism. But this was being vehemently defended ever since 1945 onwards, and later it become stronger and stronger, and still the academia is in fact following after. If you look into the things like after 75 years or so, and everybody is still behind this principle in that sense. So accordingly, we shall retain the assumptions that the firm aims at maximizing its profit. He uses the assumption of profit maximization as a working hypothesis in this theory of satisfaction of maximization. And similarly, in behavioral model of certain March and the managerial discretion model of Williamson, managerialism is merged with the marginalism is merged with managerialism. In that, the two models integrate money profit with the other managerial goals within one formula. Again, in 60s, as I said, in the 60s, there are several supportive ideas being mooted by the economist, and in fact all this idea is in fact one or the other way try to transcend the earlier attack against this particular school of thought into a newer idea, especially many of the post 1950s discussion of firms or industry is known as the industrial organization theories of industrial organization, or theories of a firm, or in largely there are so many economic model how the firm in fact acts or behave in that sense. So these are actually the kind of support later emerged, and indeed these new theories are largely we are discussing in the academia these days. But what the question is that what is actually to the core this idea of marginalism being attacked. So let us look into that aspect also. So let's discuss about the breakdown of marginalism. That is, marginalism, a body theory which postulates maximization by using marginal concepts which are associated with the specific change in the quantity of service or good. Uh, its principal position is that profits are maximized when MC equals MR, and that assumes that the firms have complete knowledge when establishing price policies and setting prices in that sense. So the marginalist revolution started in 1870s. The major proponents were, we know that Jevons, Walter Manger, and of course other economists. Some of the most important things which we know this. The neoclassical economics can be understood as a more general framework that includes marginalist concept in that sense. Okay, and I had already discussed all this part. Let's look into this aspect of the breakdown of the theory happens as follows. That is, the assumptions are unrealistic. There is a divorce of ownership and management. The firm does not pursue single goal. There is a multitude of goals, and profit maximization is one among them. Then again, information is limited, and its acquisition involves expense. The fourth one is firm do not know the demand and cost curves, and hence they cannot apply the marginalist principle. And then managers cannot act with a global rationality due to limited information and unlimited abilities, and managers try to maximize their own utility function, and the firm exhibits satisfying behavior. They pursue satisfactory profit and satisfactory growth in that sense. Then again, if the entrepreneur is a risk avoider, he will not choose the project which have high risk even though it is highly profitable in that. So the decision taken in one period affect the decision in the other period. These are actually the kind of criticism leveled against this thing, the earlier proposition of the marginalism, or the argument for marginalism, and this is all actually the counterpoint in that sense. So they said that this is actually what has happens with the real world situation when you look into the firms deeply and in detail. So they said that therefore the pricing of the real world is not actually going to happen in a simple sense of like MC equals MR, but what they said, it is actually kind of a different pricing happens there. So let's discuss the first one of this kind. So this is called the full cost pricing. So the discussion on price theory into 20th century that would later be known as the full cost controversy. So full cost pricing doctrine is seen as including full cost pricing setting procedures in which the full cost price is set by adding together direct natural and labor cost per unit output plus overhead cost determined by the standard volume output plus a predetermined profit rate margin. So in that sense, it is very clear that profit margin is actually given as a part of the price in that sense. It is not traditionally been believed that the difference between the cost and the revenue in that sense. So it is not designed to maximize profit in that sense. So it is consistent with the firm's price policy promoting price stability. Full cost pricing is not consistent with the neoclassical theory of marginalism in that sense. So therefore, this pricing mechanism is a rule of thumb and could result in maximizing profit by accident only in that sense. So now the basic idea of this has been mooted by Howland H report on or it is in fact caused the breaking down of marginalism in that sense. So in the publication of that is arrived in 1939. They discussed and they in the context of oligopoly, and oligopoly is the main market structure and firms are continuously conscious of the reaction of the competitor, and oligopolistic interdependency could not be dealt with the framework of marginalism. Firms do not attempt to maximize short-term profit by applying marginalist principle, but aim at long-run profit maximization in that sense. So firm sets their prices on the average cost principle and would sell at price whatever market takes. Firm do not know their demand curve and cost curve, so MC is equal to MR is impossible due to lack of information. That's it. Now, if firm believe that the full cost price is the right price since it is allowed fair profit and cover the cost of production when plant was normally utilized. And according to them, a firm or a firm's main preoccupation is price and not the output per se in that sense. So the prices are fairly sticky, and despite changes in demand and cost, and the stickiness is illustrated by using king demand curve apparatus by, especially luckily a few years before this has been developed by Paul M. Suisi, and this has been actually used by the Holland Hitch report. And if a firm raises its price, their competitors would not follow, so that they lose a considerable number of customers, while if they cut their prices, their competitor follow the suit, and the sales increases by an insignificant amount in that sense. So this is the nutshell where the king demand curve will introduce, and price will be equal to AC, and the king would occur at that price, and firm do not enter into the collusive agreement due to fear of potential competitors in that sense. Uh, uh, that is actually one kind of an understanding, and the firm face uncertainty concerns their customers and competitors who demands and MR schedules are unknown. And these are actually the argument, and there are other people who also advanced criticism against this marginalism. The Holland Hitch report we have seen, and now let's look into the Leicester's argument against marginalism. In 1946, critics of marginal productivity theory of wage he started with, and it won't explain wage employment relation, and marginalism was inherently capable of describing business behavior. That was one of the fundamental criticisms we was leveled against, and the business men won't think or behave marginally, in part because firm's cost structure is not compatible with the marginalism. This was another kind of a point which he was trying to make, and the marginalist tool were not sufficiently developed for business people to use in their work, and that specific economic condition prevented business people from using the marginalist tools, and it was rational for them to use a rule of thumb in that sense. So the rule of thumb is nothing but the full cost price. That is what is actually Holland Hitch was trying to make in that sense. So they were trying to bring the idea which Holland Hitch and Holland Hitch brought, and Holland Hitch's argument is largely relied upon the king to demand curve in that. So there was a connection. 1935-36, the king to demand were introduced, or I think 37. The paper has been out or so. I'll just check with it. But this is one of the most important aspect they were being using. And later what happened, there is a continuum of the discussion and the criticism against this understanding. Now, another criticism was leveled against by Aitman, and he was actually discussed this critic in 1945 said MC is equal to MR stuff is a nonsense in that sense. So it is not feasible for a multi-process firm to determine the marginal product for each variable input with respect to the each process, and hence achieve marginal efficiency, rather than more interested in the synchronizing the production process when faced with variation in input in that sense. So business firm do not use MC curve when setting a price in that sense, or the price itself. So Aitman argued that business people must face average total cost curve that permit the play of marginal cost. So that is the ATC thing, and the businessman typical perceived curve is decreasing throughout. That is up to the point of full capacity in that sense. From this finding and other assumptions, it was possible to argue that the profit maximization was refuted. So again, another sort of attack which we can see, that Gordon's attack in that. So 1948, he leveled against or he placed this argument against the thing, and the determinants of the demand and cost vary continuously, and marginal adjustment for all is beyond ability. They is a continuous change in the economic environment in that sense. So this is actually the core argument, and uncertainty is another reason for the inapplicability of marginalist principle in that sense, because we have already seen that actually how the real world market or real world situations respond to, because the real world system is basically based on the uncertainty premise, and the business concerns view their firm as going concern. So short-term profit maximization is not adopted as a policy since it lead to firms' demise in future. Instead, to maximize profit, they strive for satisfactory profit in that sense. To conclude the criticism, firms do not employ marginalist tool while setting price behavior of price are determined by fluctuation in demand and supply in that sense. So again, firms do not set price to maximize short-term profit. Full cost pricing do not seem to account for anomalous price behavior in that sense. As an answer to all this criticism against marginalism, defensive argument was given by various economists, and one of the a couple of arguments we have actually seen in the very beginning of this lecture itself, because why it is not working and how and what are the possible alternatives which can be mooted against this criticism, etc., being discussed in that sense. So let me stop this lecture, this part of the lecture here, because otherwise it will become a lengthy one. So thank you so much for listening me and your patience. Thank you.